I've always been insecure about my under eye area because I've always lacked under eye support. Ever since I was in high school, I'd have these dark circles under my eyes. Even if I slept well, I'd look super tired, and people would ask me, "Oh, are you like okay or whatever?" So it was always a huge insecurity for me, and that's why the first thing I wanted to do with my surgery is fix that under eye area. I did end up getting both of these procedures done. Alright, what's going on, guys? This is Parabone here. So we're going to be talking today about infraorbital implants versus under-eye fat transfer, differentiating the structural versus the soft tissue solutions, and understanding why implants are a more reliable and permanent fix to this problem. So let's dive right in. I made a video already on infraorbital rim implants. I highly recommend you guys watch that before watching this. But essentially, infras are just, adding bone projection under the eye. They're correcting orbital rim recession. They improve eye support and reduce hollowing. So like we talked about, when we do work on the lower eyelids, let's say that we want to reduce scleral show. Infras are bone support, and they provide under eye support to help keep that shape in place, right? To help push up the lower eye area. They're also going to change the eye framing and shadowing, provide a permanent structural correction to a lack of bone issue, right? So that's essentially what infras do. They remedy lack of bone support under the eyes. And I think that a lot of people lack bone support under the eyes typically, so it's a pretty common issue that we see with patients. So what does fat transfer do? Fat transfer is just adding soft tissue volume. It can soften, mild hollows. It's useful typically when the bone structure is already strong, and it just also has, a low durability and consistent results. In my specific case, what the surgeon did is that he extracted fat from my lower eyelids, which were a bit puffy, and he injected that in the under eye area, which was a very smart thing to do on his behalf. So why does fat transfer fail long term? The biggest reason why fat transfer tends to fail long term is because the survival of the injected fat is completely unpredictable. The under eye area has poor blood supply. Fat typically dies quickly. This is a huge thing, right? Typically with my surgery, I noticed that the under eye is one of the last things to heal. You could still feel the puffiness, the infras fusing into the bone. So there's less blood flow in that area. This is why, people have thinner skin and dark circles in that area. Furthermore, it can lead to lumps. It can lead to asymmetry if you overfill, which needs repeat surgeries. And, most importantly, the fat transfer doesn't fix the bone recession or eye shape, right? So even if you add soft tissue volume, you're still going to have, recessed infras or lack of bone mass, which is going to make you continue to look tired or old. These two procedures are not only looks maxing procedures, these are anti-aging procedures, right? So I think that typically with patients that lack infraorbital support, it leads to kind of a sunken look in the lower eye, under eye area, and furthermore, those kind of folks are more likely to have droopy lower eyelids and scleral show because of that lack of support. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the long-term efficacy of this procedure. Why do infraorbital implants work better? Well, they're more directly correct structural recession. They're a stable and permanent correction. Infras are a predictable shape and projection. I mean, these implants are pre-built specifically to be inserted in the under eye area. So it's less unpredictable in terms of, rather than just injecting fat cells, right? They improve lower eyelid support, like I talked about, which is very important. I think that's one of the most important things they do. And last thing is that they fix the tired eye look at its root. Now, keep in mind, if you have, dark circles that are genetic, even with infras and fat transfer, they will still show, right? They will still show. So it's very hard to fix that issue because, the infras provide bone support, but they don't necessarily add, a ton of soft tissue in that area. Now, even if you get both procedures done, the fat transfer may not fully correct that darkness under the eyes, But it's not an issue because, if you have strong infraorbital support, even if you have a little bit of dark circles or darkness under the eyes, it looks far better than when, without infras. I myself can say that because, when I didn't have infras, if I slept like shit or if I slept really bad, my under eye area would look terrible. But, now, if I have a bad night of sleep, it looks like I'm a little bit tired, but it's easily fixable with just a slight layer of concealer or BB cream. It's like, way better than when I, didn't have the surgery done. So that's my thoughts on that. There are some cases when fat transfer makes sense, like, my specific case. So if there's mild hollowing, if there's thin skin, you already have strong mid-phase projection, or like me, if you're doing it as an add-on, then it can be a good idea. So I highly recommend, people to look into getting both infras and fat transfer done, because that way, even if a lot of the fat doesn't survive, let's say only 50% survives, you're still getting a huge improvement to your baseline, right? You're still seeing a huge improvement compared to what you had before those two procedures. So let's talk about when are infras needed. So these are needed typically when you have deep tear trough recession, you have a negative canthal tilt, sunken orbital rim, shadowing that persists even with filler. Never do filler under the eyes, okay? I just put that there because there are some candidates, some very few that have done under eye filler and have kind of mitigated this issue. But if let's say that if you have dark circles or shadowing that persists even with concealer, even with makeup, then I think that infras are a great idea. And same thing here, tired look even with good sleep. This is all due to lack of bone support. And I was a great candidate, almost the ideal candidate for infraorbital rim implants, because I hit this, I hit this, I hit this, and I hit this. So all 5 categories, I checked the boxes. Last of all, final verdict, I think that fat transfer is a temporary solution. Implants are a permanent structural solution to, a lack of bone support problem. If the problem is bone, fat will always fail. Most men with a tired-eyed look need implants and not fat. I'd say, a lot of them need both. But that's my opinions, on this issue. I think that infraorbital rim implants are a great solution to, candidates that, present the issues that, talked about in the last slide, like negative canthal tilt, sunken orbital rims. But I think, fat transfer is also effective. The last thing I do want to say is that I think that, concealer is also highly effective. I mean, I've used concealer for years and years, and the one thing it can do very well is it can mask that darkness under the eyes, especially if you find one that matches your skin tone. So I like to be comprehensive. I'm a perfectionist. So I go for all 3, right? I go for infras, fat transfer, and concealer, right? Let's say if I'm going on a date, if I'm going to an event or a meeting with a customer, I'm gonna wear concealer, to make sure I look fresh. If I'm just at home, if I'm chilling, if I'm going to the gym or whatever, I'm not gonna bother with concealer because it doesn't look that bad after the infras and fat transfer. But that's the way I do. That's the way I do it. It's up to you. But that's my opinions, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. We're gonna be releasing a lot more content just like this, and stay tuned for next time.